Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Shapiro, and I've been invited by Nash to lead a conversation, a webinar on the possibility, the idea of math pathways for elementary education. So I'm going to begin by giving you all a sense of who is going to be helping me with this webinar. As I said, it's Math Pathways for Elementary Education, and I have two of my colleagues joining me. I'm Nancy Shapiro, Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs and Student Affairs, and Special Assistant to the Chancellor for P20 initiatives at the University System of Maryland. And I think I know some of you who are on this webinar, but I don't know all of you on this webinar. So that's who I am. I'd like to introduce my two colleagues, Debbie Ward, who's the Coordinator of Mathematics at the Maryland State Department of Education. Debbie, say hi.
Good afternoon, everybody, from MSDE in Maryland here.
Thank you. And my colleague, Deb Posey, who's the Director of Teacher Education Partnerships and Professor of Mathematics at Montgomery College.
Hi, all. Look forward to talking to you today.
Very good. Okay. So we posed a lot of questions in the blurb for this webinar. With the topic, the general topic of math pathways, within that general topic of math pathways, what would it look like, or what are some of the considerations that we might want to think about if we wanted to contemplate a pathway for elementary education students? So if we think about that, the structure of this conversation is going to try to address these questions. What are the values, purposes, and processes of building math pathways for elementary education majors, and other students, not necessarily ed majors? Are there compelling reasons to develop such targeted pathways? Who needs to be in the room for some initial conversations or discussions about this opportunity or this possibility? And what quality, what quality control mechanisms exist for ensuring that participating students actually exit the pathway, sorry, with all the necessary knowledge and competencies expected of a general education mathematics course? So those are sort of some framing questions that we'd like to talk about today. I'm going to ask Debbie Ward this sort of question that she's the expert on. What do elementary school teachers need to know and be able to do with mathematics to be successful elementary school teachers? So Debbie, why don't you take over from here?
Okay, so this has been kind of a goal of mine to make some changes in the state of Maryland since I took this job in 2014. I saw that elementary candidates were receiving, I came in wanting the world, and then I learned very much about the process and discovered that I'm not going to get more than 12 credits, and at best I may not get 12, gen ed requirement. But could I at least frame what the ones that we do get focused in mathematics to be very specific? I've always said that we have our elementary teachers are teaching kids the bulk of their foundational mathematics skills. So we need the coursework that they experience to be as targeted as possible. I mean, in a perfect world, I'd have them, have everything up through high levels of calculus, but knowing that I just get so few credits, it has to be the best 12 or 9 credits that it can possibly be. So how we started this work in Maryland is we had in the room together our math supervisors from we have 24 local school systems in Maryland. So the elementary math supervisors and then people from the four-year colleges that teach teacher preparation. And ideally what the teacher preparation folks say that they're leaving with and what our supervisors are looking for when they hire somebody would match. And what it turned out to be is that we want them to have this content knowledge for teaching, focusing on what is it that, how do I be a really good third grade teacher? How do I explain fractions all the way up through the progressions that they encounter? How do those skills build on each other? So that's what we're trying to focus on. So if we could structure a pathway where we could ensure that those few credits that are built into the program focus on those skills, we feel like we're not going to solve all the problems in the world, but at least it would be better off than we are now, because now they can come to us with college algebra, calculus, which are all great, but that doesn't make me a better third and fourth grade teacher.
Thanks. So looking back at the questions that we started with, sort of what are the value, purposes, processes of building math pathways for elementary education majors and others, I think one of the things that Debbie has been sort of contemplating is there's value in building a pathway that leads students to be able to teach, meet the expectations of the schools. And, a big question of our elementary education programs and our math programs is, are we doing that? And so that's sort of where we are. With that framework, so why are we doing this? Because we think it might be a valuable pathway for, especially at elementary education majors. But there are other possibilities, other reasons that this might be a good idea. I'm going to suggest a couple, and what I'd like you on the webinar, the participants in the webinar, to think about as I go through this short list is, what are some of the reasons that you can envision that building a math pathway for elementary education majors or programs would actually feed into the broader goals of your institution? Whoops, sorry, backwards. Okay, so this is the first thought that came to my mind when I talked to some people about this, that a math course, a general education math course that is developed with the idea of teaching students to become elementary school teachers may also be useful to other students on the campus who come with a kind of math phobia. They potentially could come into this course, overcome their difficulties, because as we all know as teachers, if you try to teach something, you learn it better. And if some of the students who come to us, we're talking general education, not just elementary ed majors, but general education, if we consider the students who come to us with math phobia, what would it be like if they came into a course that was welcoming and tried to teach them how to teach mathematics? It's a different lens on that kind of learning. And so that's a possible opportunity, I would say. A second opportunity might be the opportunity to recruit non-elementary education majors into the idea of teaching elementary school. Think about those of you who are familiar with the UTeach model at the University of Texas at Austin. When Mary Ann Rankin developed that program, she hypothesized that there are a lot of majors in the STEM disciplines, biology, chemistry, physics, who don't think about being teachers. But if you gave them an entry-level experience, a very non-judgmental, easy entry-level experience, you may be observing teachers or teaching, that you could recruit some of those majors into secondary school STEM teaching. And sure enough, she was extremely successful with that model. So what if we thought about how would we recruit some of the best and the brightest liberal arts majors into teaching as a career? Well, what if they took the Gen Ed math course that was for elementary education majors and saw, wow, this is kind of cool. So a third possibility as an opportunity is to promote program coherence for elementary education. And by that, I want to refer back to what Debbie Ward was describing as the numbers of credits. So if you're limited in the program approval process and how many credits you can use for a major, how do you get the credits for Gen Ed to be aligned with the major credits? And I'm going to actually let Debbie talk a little bit more about this as an idea, because this was in fact sort of her idea when we first started talking about this.
Well, I mean, again, in a perfect world, I would like all 12 to tackle the domains that are in the elementary curriculum. If I have to give up one of those to a Gen Ed math requirement. You know, the thing that I think could work for the general education program and the coherence to tie everything together is perhaps to have it be kind of a statistics type course that could focus on some of the skills that are building in the statistics progression, but also statistics that teachers encounter in their work, doing research, analyzing grades, analyzing test results and things of that nature. So, and again, perfect, you know, when I first started this work in Maryland, being very naive and not knowing all the pieces of the puzzle that were necessary to get any movement in this direction, I thought we could have a course for each progression that, you know, in kindergarten, take us up through high school to see how, you know, the geometry progression takes kids from the beginning to what they encounter in high school, and number and operation and so on, like how those skills build. Knowing that that can't happen, we've had to change thought process. And so we've been working a variety of initiatives here in Maryland trying to come up with a mechanism that people like Deb Posey can create programs that get in all of the coherence needed, that elementary teachers can see how the math ideas connect. And this would happen at the expense of courses like calculus and college algebra and whatnot. We need to focus them clearly on what it is that they will be teaching, that content knowledge for teaching.
Thanks. So this is a moment that I'd actually like to stop and pause for a second and see if those of you on the webinar have some other ideas about what might be some pros. If we're thinking pros and cons, what would be some of the opportunities that such a pathway, you know, before we get to the challenges, I don't want to talk about the that's the next slide. I want to talk about what are some of the opportunities, if any of you have some thoughts about that. And now I just have to figure out how to do my little, if you're writing in on the chat.
I have some thoughts. At our college, we ran a program for about 10 years with Baltimore County Public Schools, where we had teachers from the county come in, elementary teachers come in, and all we did was math content. It was incredibly helpful for all of them who did it, but it's almost like we couldn't reach enough. We could reach maybe 20 a year, and you know, you need to reach everybody. So I love this because we can reach them when they're doing their preparation.
Right.
Interesting. Good. Okay.
And one of the
yeah. Whoops. Sorry. I don't want to do that. Okay. Here. Yes. Go ahead.
One of the conversations I've had with local districts is, you know, what is it, the minimum we want them coming in with? We know that they're not finished their preparation, that it's ongoing. And so, like Linda just mentioned, we want programs like that to keep them going because, you know, that continuous improvement, getting better at your craft. But it's like, what can be the expectations of that bare minimum in this coherent elementary education program? What's that entry level expectation is what we've been working with.
Deb, did you have any thoughts about this on the pro side here? Or
Well, certainly the idea, especially the first one for me, about the idea that having the students that are really struggling with math or have that math phobia be involved in something like this is intriguing for me, because I've had students who are enrolled in the elementary ed math courses who will ask the question, you know, are you teaching us this so that we can teach it to our students, or because you want us to learn it? And the answer is yes. And I think that would really be a model that might play really well in the way many students who are, you know, not necessarily STEM majors could benefit.
Cool. Okay. So let's move on to some of the challenges to developing such a pathway, an elementary education pathway. So I'm sure we all can think of challenges. So I'm going to, you know, stop for a second and let you think about what gets in the way here. Make some notes. And then let's talk about this one to start with. The misconception that math for elementary education is basic or elementary math, and it's not college level. I would actually like my math folks on this webinar to sort of rebut that if they can.
Deb, do you want to go first, or you want me to?
I was going to say, so I just wanted to make sure we don't talk over each other. So, one of the things that as soon as I was thinking about this point, I was mentioning to Nancy and to Debbie earlier today that I was at a training where we were discussing the fact that I had taught this set of courses at my college. And the general feeling from the math teachers in the room was that they would never teach a course like this because it's what they called girly math. In other words, only the math for those girls, those women who were going into elementary or early childhood. And at the same time, when I work with students who are in these courses and they go to a tutor who's taken traditional mathematics along the way, they're not able to get help on this content because it is so conceptual. And it requires a lot of background knowledge. So figuring out how to fight that misconception is huge for me. And I think we have to make sure that the teachers and the students understand really what's happening in this content.
And the experience I thought of earlier was when I was a high school math teacher and content well, and I know how to do the mathematics at the earlier grades, but I didn't have this content knowledge for teaching. That wasn't part of my preparation. So Common Core came along. I had to start thinking about things differently. And I remember here in our office wrestling, we were doing what we want the teachers to do and show like a representation of why 2/3 divided by 3/4 is what it is. Just a representation of that and why the algorithm for division of fractions is what it is. And that is challenging. So if anybody wants to say that this is too basic, give them that kind of problem and let them see the challenge of some of the things that we're trying to get these potential teachers, that skill set that we're trying to get them to acquire. And then I think they see that there's a lot more to it than just mastering an algorithm for a process. And that's how instruction is different now, how we've tried to shift things.
Linda, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything on this or not?
Wait, sorry, I muted myself.
Oh, that's okay.
It reminds me of when we've talked about children's literature at the college and they say, oh, that's not a real course because that's just kids lit. So it sort of reminded me of that when you said about girly math, Deb. I would agree with everything everyone has said.
Okay, so part of the challenge will be if we decide this is a good model or if this is something worth trying, is at least defining, or defending why this is a misconception and why it's that the conceptual level, the reasoning power that goes into elementary math, teaching elementary math, is really a very sophisticated set of understandings for students. Okay, so another challenge is who's going to teach the courses. Typically, math education faculty traditionally teach elementary education math courses, at least at the four-year universities. So is this a problem? Do the people on the webinar think that this is a challenge, and what way? And again, let me turn to Deb for first comment.
So as you mentioned, of course, the universities, typically it's the math education faculty who teach it, although there are places, of course, where mathematics department faculty do as well. But at the community colleges, we don't have something called the math education faculty. It is just the mathematics department. So one of the concerns is making sure that whatever department it would be monitoring this coursework, and particularly if it's a gen ed course, it's likely to be math faculty, that it is taught particularly in a way that models good teaching and that models the kinds of things that are part of Common Core, for example. And I know Debbie, my colleague, would echo that.
Right, absolutely. In the conversations I've been in, it's like, ideally, I would like the mathematics educator to teach these courses because I think they have a stronger foundation in that content knowledge for teaching, that they understand better that now in all grades that we want the math practices, that we want them to develop not only the procedures, but the conceptual understanding and the ability to apply these skills. And I think generally that's a skill set that's probably something that the math ed faculty have a stronger handle on and are probably better equipped to deliver these courses. So for me, that would be the ideal. I think of in Maryland some of the really strong mathematics educators we have, and it's like that's what I want for your prospective candidates.
Very, very. So I'm getting some comments, and I'm not sure whether you can see these comments or not because I'm not. I'm just not sure about this platform. So let me just read you some of the comments, and maybe if Monica or Mary would like to unmute themselves and add some thoughts here, please do. So Monica writes, I have some students who do not have the concepts of numbers or early number sense. I believe they need support. So that's an interesting, yeah, I think that's huge. I mean, I'm not a mathematician, but it seems to me that the idea that you can always put a dot in between two dots, you can always put a point between 2 points, the sort of the notion of infiniteness, infinity, what is infinity? It's not just big, it's also little. Sort of, what is that? How do you communicate that to people who don't actually, don't start with that as a basic understanding of number sense? Mary Verostic says, at the community college, I have an elementary degree with middle school math discipline, but I'm a math faculty member. I'm very familiar with the Common Core. That's really, that is actually probably unusual in many ways, because I think the Common Core is, many math faculty across the country participated in developing Common Core outcomes. I know many of them who did, but not all of them did. And especially math faculty from the system perspective, that those of you who are in the webinar from the perspective of a system, and you think about your research universities and how many of the faculty understand anything about what the K-12 school standards are, that's, I think, a particular disconnect. Monica also mentions that some students do not have strong math content knowledge and they can't pass state teaching certification tests. Yeah, that's for sure. So I need to know, somebody needs to send me a note saying whether you can see these chats because I'm sharing my screen or not, because I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to close this little thing here. Yes. We can see. Oh, yes, we can see that.
Yes, they can.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Then I don't have to read them. Good. All right. I'm going to cut close enough. All right. Awesome. So.
Yes, we can see that.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So this is another challenge. New general education requirements bring a host of other challenges. This over here. Other changes, including questions of funding and enrollment, among other things. Who needs to be on board for those general education changes? Those of you who have done any kind of a negotiation around Gen Ed know that it becomes like a feeding frenzy, at campuses when somebody says, oh, this is going to be, we're going to approve this as a Gen Ed course. What does that mean to a department that's going to offer a Gen Ed course that's open to the entire campus? What do we think about? What do we think? Anybody had that experience? Have a comment on that?
This is Jen Koziak from Wisconsin, and about 2 years ago we moved our Math for Elementary School Teachers Sequence 1 and 2 into our Gen Ed program. And since there were math courses that went through the math department, and everyone on our campus is required to take at least one, so it wasn't fighting different departments for credit, it was just fighting our own campus for the credit, or our own department for it. So.
Wow. But it really did become a Gen Ed credit. So.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we did that because teacher ed is at 160 credits, and our state is saying you need to move it down to 120. So that's one way we were able to satisfy credit requirements. So.
really interesting, because I think that's one of the reasons that we are thinking about doing this kind of curricular innovation, for exactly that reason, that when the credit requirements start being limited, which they should be, because we don't want students to be in college forever, then how do you get both end from these courses? And of course can be gen ed and also serve the needs of the the general student population. Okay, let me get down here. Okay. Other thoughts about this? Oh, I have 2 more comments. Hold on, let me get these comments. So you can see this. Okay, you can see all the chat. So LHU has our 2 math for elementary ed courses. There's gen ed courses. That's good, and they're very popular among all majors. That's something that people don't know. I think that this would be very interesting data to put in front of mathematics faculty and university administrators.
Could they speak? Could that person share what's included in those courses?
Yeah, why don't you unmute yourself, Deneen, and describe what you're talking about.
Sure, absolutely. I teach those courses, and it is so true that the misconception, even among my department, is that these courses are very easy courses. However, as students take them, they realize it is in no way an easy grade. That, students and faculty don't understand the modeling and all of the different approaches to teaching arithmetic and multiplication and division and so forth. So I think key in making these courses not only valuable for gen ed, but valuable for the program is having the right faculty teaching them. And a couple of people mentioned it being a math ed person. And that math ed person can look a variety of ways. They can have a math ed degree, or they can have a math degree, but education background, some teaching experiences in the middle grades and early grades. But our courses are very popular among all the majors.
What mathematics content do they cover?
One of them is statistics, geometry, algebra, and probability. And then the other one is the arithmetic models, place value, number systems, and decimals, percents, ratios, and so forth.
Very, very interesting. It looks like, Monica, you're having trouble turning on your mic. She says, in Texas, we will have certification for pre-K to 3rd grade. I think it's a good time to start the conversation to change out the math general education courses to early math content. So I don't know if you can find the little mic with the mute button on your screen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh.
I can hear you. Yes, yes.
Hey.
Go, Monica.
Hi, yes, I'm Monica from Texas. I am a university professor, a teacher in bilingual education, and I train math teachers for EC. We call it the early childhood to 6th grade. And then in my university, every semester I have some students that they struggle with the math content. So they took because we also have community college transfer students, so so they really need help in the content, and then so what they need, I just think that they need more help in the gen ed college, those courses, because when they come to see me, it will be my job is to teach them how to teach math. Instead of helping them to build up their content knowledge. So I try to ask them to see whether the community college will help them to provide them with some tutoring. But then I think that this is a conversation that we can start with gen ed college, because I mean, like for the elementary ed math. Focus in gen ed will really help, because that is a time that they can, if they forgot the skills, it will be a good time to revisit. And instead of learning something that is So I just think that it is a good way to align with the courses that will prepare them better. Especially in Texas, we will have EC to third grade certification. That means those students, they will teach babies from pre-K all the way to third grade. And if they do not have strong background, and that will really harm the students, the young children.
That I think that's one of the things that we all can agree on. I think is that if our elementary school teachers do not have a strong understanding, conceptual understanding of mathematics, it will harm our students, and that's going to be that we're going to be the inheritors of those. The higher ed community is going to be the inheritors of those challenges. Okay, I want to move to a discussion. So keep these sort of challenges in your mind. I want to move to a discussion of the possible sort of policy framework under sort of the current Gen Ed regulations. And I know most of you who are on the phone got the email that I had asked you to at least take a look at or have handy the framing of your general education math requirements, or math and foundational studies or fundamental studies requirements. I'm going to share with you some of the Maryland work that we've done, because it's not always clear in some of those policies whether such a pathway would actually be allowable. All right. So looking at Maryland's model, and I am going to try to move this down to the bottom here. Why it's not in the way. Okay. So looking at Maryland's model, on the right-hand side, you can see some of the language that, hold on a second. It's in the way. There we go. So you can see some of the language that we started with. The original language in Maryland's Code of Maryland, which is the regulatory language, COMAR's Code of Maryland. And it just defines general education programs at public institutions shall require, and then it talks about arts and humanities and social sciences and sciences. And number 4, 1 course in mathematics at or above the level of college algebra. When we started to study the policy and thinking about general pathways in mathematics in Maryland, we realized that while that language didn't preclude other pathways necessarily, the default position was that everybody would have to take a college algebra course. Even though it doesn't say that, it says 1 course in mathematics at or above the level of college algebra. The question that was raised by many of the community colleges was, and our law says that we by law, transfer any general education course between public 2-year and public 4-year universities. So in order to be on the safe side, our community colleges were requiring most students to take college algebra, because they knew that if they had college algebra on the transcript, that would transfer to a 4-year university. If it doesn't say college algebra, then the students might be at risk. So by default, before we changed our policy, most institutions guided students, advised students into college algebra, even if it wasn't the right course for them. So when we started our Math Pathways work several years ago, we sort of unpacked that language, and we have it's not as simple as that college algebra language. It's a more dense and complicated analysis, but we tried we ran this language through all of our constituency stakeholder groups, and we came up with the language on the left. So the current COMAR language, Code of Maryland language, says 1 course in mathematics having performance expectations demonstrating a level of mathematical maturity beyond the Maryland College and Career Readiness Standards in mathematics. Those are our Common Core, essentially our Common Core standards. And then including problem-solving skills and mathematical concepts and techniques that can be applied in the student's program of study. So by revising that language, we actually opened up the possibilities, in Maryland at least, for the kinds of pathway programs that we are describing in some of our other work. I mean, And we have multiple pathways. We don't yet have an elementary education pathway. So I have 3 comments. I'm going to pull them up. Hold on. Okay. So Tammy says, in Missouri, we have a set of statewide learning outcomes for our elementary education pathway. So and we do too. That's good. And I would expect that there should be something like that across all states and systems. And then Carrie says, that's how we have it in West Virginia. West Virginia policy is similar to what Maryland's was. So everyone has college algebra. Okay, so that's a problem. Because, if everybody defaults to college algebra, Deb, I see you shaking your head. Go.
Well, yes, because that's going to be a problem. Exactly. That goes right back to what Debbie Ward was saying, and that's a problem that we all see, is that if college algebra has to be one of the math courses that every elementary ed, for example, has to take, then we're in some senses losing those 3 credits that aren't really getting to be applied directly to the content knowledge for teaching that we have so much to talk about. At the same time, then, the flip side is, if we could have that course as a gen ed that would not be college algebra, then we can move students into their elementary algebra or their elementary ed curriculum directly and meet the gen ed at the same time. And of course, that's what we're talking about here.
Right. Cool. Okay, I see another comment. Hold on. Let's pull that up. Okay. Nope. Okay.
Nancy, can I just make a comment?
Sure, Tammy, go ahead.
I'm Tammy from Missouri. What I gave you guys a link to is the elementary math pathways, and it's the whole set. So if somebody looks at that and thinks, oh my gosh, you guys are teaching that in one course, we didn't specify how many courses. Some of us had 3 courses at 3 credits. Some people had 2 courses at 3 credits. Some people had 2 courses at 4 credits. So there's not a course specification out there, but it is just the content. So if somebody's looking at that and thinks, oh my gosh, what are you guys doing? No, we're not trying to teach it one course. Mm-hmm. We didn't want to specify that because of the stipulations in general education in different places for public and private. So that's what's out there. I just wanted to clarify that.
That's great. No, that's really helpful. And I think that we talk, so, maybe Debbie, this is an opportunity to talk a little bit about outcomes. And the way we, especially, you might want to just talk a little bit about our Associate of Arts of Teaching, mm-hmm. which is an
similar to what she was just describing.
Yeah. So maybe I don't know that everybody else has an AAT. So maybe you could describe what the AAT is, Deb.
Right. So certainly it is true that other states have an Associate of Arts in Teaching, and they don't all look exactly the same, but the principle being that there is an approved set of courses that meets this requirement of the first 2 years of the teacher ed degree, and then they can transfer to schools in the state. That's the way our AAT works, Associate of Arts in Teaching. And what we have done really recently is to go through what those outcomes for elementary education mathematics coursework should be for the Associate of Arts in Teaching programs, because we're in a review process. So interesting what you said, Tammy, about your pathway there. We are desperately trying to make 12 credits worth of coursework. We don't stipulate how they're aligned. For example, right now we have 3 courses of 4 credits each that we get to use, for that purpose at our college and in the AAT programs. But not every college in Maryland even has that much mathematics in their pathway. Thank you for the link. I'm going to go look at it after we get off this webinar. But if you don't mind, I'm going to confirm what you said, which was that something in this pathway can meet the general education requirement for your college as well?
Yes.
For math?
Across the states, part of that, however they've divvied it up, is the math requirement for general education.
Interesting. Cool.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving to this notion of what is the math readiness that students need. So a lot of this conversation that we're having really happens at the intersection of higher education and K-12. It happens because, as I say when I go around the state talking about P20 or P16, I say students can't learn what they haven't been taught, and teachers can't teach what they haven't learned. All right? So if these are, right now in Maryland, we have a statewide mathematics group. It's called the SMG, the Statewide Math Group. Statewide Math Group is all the 4-year public and private and 2-year college representatives come together on a regular basis, a couple, 2-3 times a year, to talk about issues that are shared issues. We always invite Debbie Ward to come to those meetings because we need that grounding in what's going on and what the expectations are in the K-12 schools. Over the course of several years, the statewide math group came up with a list of mathematics knowledge and skills for college readiness. So I'm going to let Debbie describe, because she was probably there at the beginning of this conversation, or if not, she sort of knows how it came about, and describe not just how these 11 ideas came to be part of the college readiness list, but what the challenges are moving forward. Debbie, do you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, I'll take, but I don't know that I was coordinator at the time when they developed this, but I think we are in a very fluid time with this college readiness piece. This is ideal. I would like all kids to leave high school with this. They would be ready for whatever pathway they choose in college. But so much discussion around pathways in general, not just the elementary pathway, that this may need some revisiting now that, like, Maryland's in the First in the World grant and we have statistics as the entry level. So perhaps this needs to get a second look. This was very much the case, I'd say, 5 years ago. Still a good list that ideally anybody would leave the free education they get in high school having this skill set. But I almost think that it needs to be something we kind of take a look at again, and perhaps does it need a few edits in light of the fact that we have multiple pathways now. But yeah, this is very much the foundation that if they make it through Algebra 2 in the high school level, that they should have this.
Mm-hmm. Good point. And anybody else from Maryland want to comment on how this list arrived, or how we arrived at this list?
Deb, were you part of the group at that time?
Well, I have been in and out of that group. I've spent more time in the education world than the math world of late, so I don't always get to those. But one of the things that we certainly know is that this list gets put together, and it depends sometimes on who's in the room talking. And there are constantly reevaluations of how this works. I'm noticing that somebody asked the question, are these 11 the only ones? And I think, these are in broad strokes what was agreed upon finally to do. And even as it's finished being written, it has kind of already needed to be revised. And these have been around, they were created at the same time that the COMAR was changed. So that would be 2 years ago, Nancy?
Yeah, actually closer to 3 years ago.
Almost 3 now, that's what I was trying to remember. So they really haven't been revisited since then.
Yeah. So let me look at I have to open the chat comments. Okay, this is how West Virginia is similar. Okay. Okay, Deneen also makes a comment. LHU has a requirement of passing basic algebra section of our math placement exam. Are these the only 11? Yeah, okay, good. You answered those questions. Got it, thanks. Sorry. So one of the things about this list is that it's pretty, as both Debbie and Deb said, it's pretty traditional in many ways. It's written from the perspective of higher ed, looking at everything that as if everybody in K-12 is going to go on to an academic college degree. And in many ways, we have so many new understandings about where students are going and how long it's taking them to go these different places, whether it's apprenticeships or career technology programs or others, that keeping an eye on the ball around mathematics, I think, is the shared responsibility of K-12 and higher ed. And looking at this list, obviously, we probably need to take a look at it again. Okay.
And I think the big challenge too is making sure that we are in agreement. As There's so much change on the horizon with pathways, and what is the mathematics, and we need to reevaluate the world where we're in right now. Mm-hmm. What are the mathematical needs of students today, and do they still mirror the past? Is this list, I mean, in a perfect world, I'd like all kids to have everything on that list. Mm-hmm. To be college ready, is it still essential for all the different majors they're going to encounter to keep the same list, or could it be revisited and changed perhaps a bit in light of the different ways? Perfect segue.
Great, perfect segue. So in Maryland, one of the things we did was ask some of those questions and came up with three pathways for students in Maryland once they've been admitted to college to fulfill their college math requirements, their gen ed math requirements. The traditional one is the college algebra course, which is typically taken by students who think they want to go into STEM majors or STEM related majors. And is sometimes required by nursing or by other by other majors that while they may not be considered STEM, they have pathways that take them through some STEM courses. The second pathway that we developed in Maryland as part of our recent sort of innovation in mathematics is the statistics pathway. And that's the pathway that's designed primarily for social science majors, but it could also be potentially for education majors or other, arts majors or whatever, but it's a statistics pathway. And we have the math community came together to identify outcomes of a general education statistics course that may or may not be enough for a major in, if you're majoring in psychology or sociology, you may still have to take a second statistics course for that major, but that this would be a good base for a pathway course. The third pathway that we have is called Topics in Mathematical Literacy, and you'll notice that it's sort of highlighted on my slide. And the reason I highlighted it is because it's in some ways, it's the broadest, it approaches sort of the broadest population that we have. A college-level math course designed for college students who do not expect to need college algebra, a statistics course, or a high-level mathematics course. The goal of the course is to focus on subjects that could be of value to students and help them make mathematically literate decisions. I should have had decisions at the end. So if we stop here for a minute and think about what we have been discussing as an elementary education math pathway, I'd like to raise the possibility that this area, this kind of category of mathematics courses might encompass that. And I wanted to throw that out for conversation. Deb.
So definitely, one of the things that I commented on when we were having these discussions is that I teach a course like this now, have for many years in the mathematics department. And the idea that something around this could also be connected with the elementary education pathway, I think is really terrific. And thinking about how that could fit is fascinating to me. I'm looking in my chat box here to Tammy to look at what Missouri lists there. I'm just curious, and to see how we might think about what would be a good gen ed that would meet our Maryland mathematical literacy content and also be the right place to be on a pathway for elementary education.
This is Barbara Bales from UW System. Hi, Nancy. Hello, everybody. I just came from a meeting at our State Department, and I'm wondering how the notions of these pathways will align with the changes to the core, the Praxis, the new Praxis core, because I understand it's being revised, and that they are going to decrease the amount of algebra and increase the amount of statistics and decrease the geometry. And I'm wondering if other states use that core exam as a gatekeeper into the profession, first of all, and then second, how though that exam, either previously or as it's going to be revised, aligns with these notions of gateway?
That is an awesome question. I can't answer it, but anybody on the webinar? Can anybody sort of?
Well, so one of the things that, of course, is true is, yes, in Maryland, and that's all I can speak for. In Maryland, we do have a basic skills test requirement that is part of the certification requirement, and then as a result has become an entry requirement to the professional programs in education, and as a result is a graduation requirement for the Associate of Arts in Teaching. So we do have that thread. An interesting discussion we continue to have is that while the Praxis Core is one of the tests that's required, also the SAT or the ACT sort of equivalence is accepted. And to be honest, those are tests that typically measure end of high school ability. So it's not clear that our courses at the collegiate level really ought to be the preparation for this basic skills test, that in some respects, all we should really be documenting is that they had college and career readiness, which is what this does. So I'm very interested to see what might be happening with the core, just to see, but we frankly often recommend our students to simply look at one of the other basic skills tests as well. So.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Any other comments about Barbara's question? I think that one of the challenges, and this is sort of like a system question, but it's also an education specific question. One of the challenges is that, yes, we want our students to have some basic understanding of mathematical literacy. That is a non-negotiable, but it's necessary, but not sufficient. And so what we're talking about, I think, with the Gen Ed sort of mathematical literacy for elementary teachers is to go deeper than those basic understandings, basic as Debbie calls them, the algorithmic understandings of mathematical structures. It's not just memorizing the algorithms, it's understanding why those things happen. What is 2/3 of 3/5? What are we talking about? Are we talking about a pie? Are we talking about a deck of cards? How do you separate it? So I think that unless our students are really drawn into the problem, the problem solving visualizations of mathematics, that we're not doing what we need to be doing. It's not just minimum competencies that we're after. And I think that that's where, if we're going to be doing any lobbying about this within our communities and constituencies, that's what we have to get to.
And that was where I wondered about the policy implications.
Yeah, so I think that we actually, so there are people on this call who I'm envisioning have system perspectives on what it would take to make broader policy decisions that would impact broader segments of the community. And I would love to hear from them. In fact, this is the slide with our 5 minutes left to sort of open it up and ask, what are the policies that either you have or you'd like to see? And I know that some of you have already mentioned that you have some experiences with pathways for elementary education majors. I'm curious about what some of our next steps could be or should be. This is a NASH-sponsored conversation. My colleagues who I brought on board from the Maryland community, in part, I wanted to demonstrate that, as in the Hamilton musical words, they need to be in the room where it happens. Okay, all of these people need to be in the room where it happens. The K-12, math coordinator has to be in the room where it happens. The community colleges have to be in the room where it happens. The 4 years, even if they're not part of the system technically, they're part of the system that educates the teachers. So I'm curious, what are some of you thinking about next steps for either for you and your courses, you and your institutions, you and your systems? And I'm just gonna let people have one comment up here. Let me see, we got one comment in the chat box. So Deneen asks, what would or could the topics course be a consumer math type course? Probably. I mean, I think that that is certainly, Linda, I don't know, I don't do the math courses, but I think that they can have different flavors as long as they cover basics. So that's the way I'm thinking about it.
Well, and I'm thinking about, like if we were really talking about next steps in Maryland, for example.
Okay.
I would assume, but you know what they say about assuming. I would assume that it would have to be something statewide, if that's what you're envisioning, because I know we've run into problems with individual four-year colleges when their gen eds, for example, change. And you know where I'm going. You know, I'm trying to find out how to say that diplomatically. But if the four-year colleges gen eds change, then sometimes we're sort of stuck. So it feels like maybe it needs to be a statewide thing as opposed to college by college.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does to me. I'm curious. We have people from Texas on the phone. We have people from Utah on the phone. We have people Missouri. We have a bunch of people. I'm really interested in, you can unmute yourself if you have some thoughts about what would next steps look like for you in your system or in your state, if you were interested in doing this.
This is Julie from Utah. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, thank you.
So I think our next steps, we are having early conversations about how to create an education math pathway, and that would need to be aligned statewide. So some of the schools are further ahead than others, and then the next step would be to align statewide.
Yep. Okay. That's good to know. For those of you in the Nash community, there is an annual meeting coming up in April. And to the extent that, and I'm leading a session on math pathways, to the extent that you would like to continue this conversation at that meeting, or the people who your system is sending to that meeting, let me know, and I will tap them, as I put together that strand of work on math pathways, because I think right now, math pathways, people are thinking primarily statistics, liberal arts math, algebra. I don't know whether they're thinking of these other possibilities, and it's something to think about. Anybody have any last thoughts before we close the webinar?
Just that, looking at NCTM put out a book called Catalyzing Change. It has some interesting ideas in it that might lead to a description of the pathway. There's been too many high school standards. I don't know how many of you are in on this conversation that I'm grappling with to fit in 3 courses of high school. And so they have some interesting thoughts about structures at the high school program that could eventually frame what a pathway, the quantitative literacy, or your, I forget what you had on your slide, how you describe it, but that, algebra pathway is clear, the statistics pathway is pretty clear, but it's the other pathway that's not quite as clear. And looking at the Catalyzing Change book by NCTM might serve as a good resource for informing what that course could look like.
That's great. I think the NCTM stuff is going to be really good. I know that Deb is organizing a statewide team to go to the Conference Board of Mathematical Sciences, CBMS. Some other states may be going to the CBMS conference in Virginia. If you're going, we can connect there to talk about this too, because I think CBMS is that big umbrella that looks at all the mathematical standards and competencies across all. The NCTM will be there, MAA will be there, all the other groups will be there, so that'll be good. I'm gonna get one comment. Somebody said, okay, happy to speak with anybody interested in what we've done in South. Thank you, Tammy. Oh, good, okay. All right, just so for your, I'm in trouble here. Okay, this is how you can reach us if you want to email any of us. I really appreciate everybody's participation on this webinar. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation, and that's how you can get in touch with us. I really also want to thank my colleagues, Deb Posey and Debbie Ward, for their insights, and Linda Quinn, who's also one of our colleagues here, and everybody else who participated. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for putting this together.
Yep.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Yeah.
Bye.